My parents kicked me out at 18, then demanded I let them move into my house. When I turned 18, my parents gave me exactly 2 weeks to leave their house. Not because I got in trouble, not because I dropped out of school, not because I was lazy. Their reasoning was simple. An adult now. That's it. No financial help, no backup plan, no safety net, just a deadline. I still remember standing in the kitchen thinking they were joking. They weren't. 2 weeks later, I loaded everything I owned into the back of an old car and left. My mother cried. My father didn't. He just shook my hand like I was some employee leaving a company. At the time, I convinced myself it was normal. Maybe they were teaching me independence. Maybe tough love worked. Maybe I was overreacting. It took years to realize something important. My parents didn't do that to my older sister or my younger brother, just me. My sister lived at home until she was 26. My parents helped pay her rent after she moved out. My younger brother stayed until 24. Dad even helped him buy a car. Meanwhile, I got a handshake and a deadline. Funny how tough love only applied to one child. The first few years were rough. I worked everywhere, restaurants, warehouses, night shifts, weekend jobs, anything that paid. There were nights I slept in my car because rent consumed almost everything I earned. Birthdays came and went. Holidays came and went. My parents rarely called. If I contacted them, conversations lasted 5 minutes. Yet somehow they always found time for my siblings. Eventually, I stopped expecting anything. And strangely enough, my life improved. Without family drama, I focused on myself. I built a career, started a business, made smart financial decisions. Slowly, things got better, then much better. Then one day, something happened I never thought possible. I bought a house, not a mansion. Not some luxury estate, just a house, my house. The first thing I'd ever owned that couldn't fit in the trunk of a car. I was proud, really proud. Most people congratulated me. My parents barely reacted. My mother said, "Must be nice." That was it. No congratulations, no excitement, just must be nice. Honestly, I wasn't surprised. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It happened almost 8 years after I moved out. My father called unexpectedly. Now, my father never called. Texts were rare. Phone calls were practically a national emergency. Immediately, I assumed something terrible happened. Maybe someone was sick. Maybe someone was injured. Instead, my father got straight to the point. He asked how many bedrooms my house had. Weird question. I told him, then he asked if the guest room was occupied. Even weirder. A few minutes later, I finally understood where the conversation was heading. My parents wanted to move in, not temporarily, indefinitely. I nearly dropped my phone. The same parents who threw me out at 18 suddenly needed housing. According to them, circumstances had changed. Financial issues, unexpected expenses, retirement problems. The details were vague, very vague. And that's what bothered me. Because my parents never admitted weakness. Never. The fact they were asking me for help meant something serious was happening. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet them. The meeting felt strange from the beginning. My parents acted like the decision was already made. Not asking, assuming, my mother was already discussing furniture placement. My father was talking about garage space. At one point, they actually referred to my guest room as their room. Their room. In my house, before I'd even agreed. That's when alarm bells started ringing. Something wasn't right. Then came twist number one. A few days later, my sister called, and she was furious, not at me, at our parents. Apparently, they asked her first. She said no, then they asked my brother. He also said no. I sat there stunned, because during our meeting, they told me I was the first person they approached. Lie number one, interesting. So I started asking questions, questions my parents clearly didn't want to answer. Eventually, the truth started leaking out. Their financial situation wasn't caused by retirement. It wasn't caused by medical bills either. The real reason was my brother, my younger brother, the same brother who got the car, the same brother who got years of support. The same brother who was always treated like the family favorite. Apparently, he'd started a business. Apparently, my parents invested heavily. Apparently, things went very badly, very badly. We're talking 6 figures badly. Suddenly, the story made a lot more sense. But then came twist number two, because while investigating their finances, I discovered something else, something nobody mentioned. My parents weren't just broke. They were selling their house, the family house. House they'd lived in for nearly 30 years, the house they swore they'd never leave, the house they planned to pass down someday, yet somehow it was suddenly on the market. When I confronted them, they looked shocked, almost nervous. Then my father said something that immediately made me suspicious. "We were going to tell you later." Never a good sign. People only say that when they're hiding something. At that point, I stopped seeing this as a simple housing problem. Too many details didn't add up. Too many stories kept changing. Then everything got even stranger. One evening, a neighbor from my parents' street contacted me, someone I'd known since childhood. She asked if my parents had moved yet. I said no. Then she told me something that made my stomach drop. A moving company had already been to the house, twice. Boxes were already packed. Furniture was already gone. According to my parents, they were still deciding what to do. Apparently, that wasn't true, because from the outside, it looked like they'd already made plans. Plans they hadn't told me about. That's when I realized something. My parents weren't asking for help. They were working towards something specific. And for whatever reason, they weren't being honest about it. The next morning, I drove to their neighborhood. I wasn't planning to spy, honestly. But curiosity got the better of me. When I arrived, I immediately noticed several things. The house looked emptier. The garage was half empty. And parked in the driveway was a car I didn't recognize. Then I saw who got out, a man I'd never met before. He used a key, opened the front door, and walked inside like he lived there. At that moment, I knew one thing for certain. My parents were hiding something much bigger than financial problems, and whatever was really happening. It was about to land directly on my doorstep. I sat in my car across the street for nearly 20 minutes, just watching. The mysterious man walked around the property like he owned it, not visiting, not helping, owned it. That distinction mattered, because my parents had spent weeks telling me they were still figuring things out. Clearly, they weren't. Eventually, I drove away before anyone noticed me. But now I had a new problem. Who was that guy? And why did he have a key to my parents' house? The answer came from an unexpected source, my childhood neighbor, the same one who told me about the moving trucks. When I called her later that evening, she immediately knew who I was talking about. Apparently, his name was Greg. A real estate investor. My stomach dropped. Because that meant one thing: the house wasn't about to be sold. The house had already been sold. My parents had been negotiating for months, months, while pretending they didn't know what their future plans were. At this point, I wasn't even angry anymore. I was confused. Why lie? Why not just tell me the truth? Then came another twist, a huge one: the sale price. Through public records, I discovered roughly how much the property sold for. And the number shocked me. Even after debts and fees, my parents should have walked away with a substantial amount of money. Enough to rent comfortably, enough to buy a smaller place, enough to avoid moving into my guest room. So where was the money going? That question haunted me for about 3 days. Then my sister called again. And finally, things started making sense. Apparently, my brother's failed business wasn't actually the end of the story. It was just the beginning, according to her. After losing money on the business, my parents continued helping him. Again, and again, and again. Loan payments, credit cards, rent, equipment purchases, emergency expenses. Every time he got into trouble, they stepped in. Over the years, the amount became enormous, far larger than anyone realized, including my sister, including me, possibly even including my parents. Suddenly, everything clicked: the missing money, the house sale, the desperation, the urgency. They weren't homeless. They were exhausted, financially exhausted, after spending years rescuing my brother. Then came twist number 3. Because my brother didn't know they were asking me for housing. At least that's what he claimed. When I called him directly, he sounded genuinely surprised. Not fake surprised, actually surprised. He insisted our parents never told him. That didn't make sense. How could the entire crisis revolve around him without his knowledge? Then he revealed something shocking. He thought our parents were moving in with my sister. My sister thought they were moving in with me. I thought they were still deciding. Nobody had the same story. Nobody. At that moment, I realized my parents were telling different versions of reality to different people. And that usually means one thing: they're trying to manage a situation nobody wants exposed. So I pushed harder, a lot harder. Eventually, my father agreed to meet privately, just the two of us. The conversation started tense, then became uncomfortable, then became something else entirely. Because for the first time in my life, my father looked defeated, not angry, not stubborn, defeated. Honestly, that was harder to see. He admitted they had made mistakes. A lot of mistakes. The biggest one, refusing to let my brother experience consequences. Every financial rescue solved one problem temporarily, but created 3 more later. Eventually, helping became enabling, and enabling became dependency. Then he said something I never expected: "You were the only one we knew would be okay." I just stared at him, because somehow that sentence managed to be both a compliment and an insult. Apparently, the reason they pushed me out at 18 wasn't because they thought I was incapable. It was because they thought I was the most capable, the strongest, the most independent. According to my father, they believed I'd succeed regardless. Meanwhile, they constantly worried about my siblings, so resources flowed toward them, support flowed toward them, attention flowed toward them, and somehow they convinced themselves that was fair. Honestly, that explanation didn't make me feel better. It made me feel worse. Because it meant they knew exactly what they were doing. Then came the biggest revelation yet. The reason they wanted my house wasn't actually money, it was control. That sounds strange. But hear me out. My parents weren't prepared for retirement, not emotionally. For decades, their lives revolved around managing family crises, fixing problems, solving emergencies, making decisions. Now suddenly they had no house, no clear purpose, no structure, no plan. Moving into my home wasn't just about housing. It was about maintaining the family dynamic they understood, a dynamic where they remained at the center of everything. And for the first time, I saw the situation differently. This wasn't a simple request for help. It was a collision between the family I grew up in and the life I built afterward. Then things got even messier. Because a week later, my mother arrived at my house unannounced, with measurements, actual measurements. She'd already measured furniture, already planned room layouts, already made lists. I couldn't believe it. She genuinely assumed she was moving in, despite never receiving permission. And that's when I realized something important. The real conflict wasn't whether I had space. The real conflict was whether anyone had ever accepted that I was no longer the 18-year-old kid they pushed out the door. I owned the house. I made the decisions. I set the boundaries. And judging by my mother's reaction, she wasn't prepared for that reality. Then, just when I thought the situation couldn't get any stranger, my sister uncovered something hidden in the property paperwork, something connected to the sale of the family home, something our parents hadn't mentioned, something that completely changed the stakes. Because according to the documents she found, the sale wasn't the end of the story. There was another property involved, a second property, one none of us knew existed. And somehow, our parents' names weren't the only names attached to it. At that moment, I realized we still didn't know where all the money had gone, and whatever secret was attached to that property. It was about to explain everything. The moment my sister mentioned the second property, I assumed there had to be some mistake, a paperwork error, an old investment, something simple. Nothing about this situation had been simple so far, but I still hoped. Unfortunately, I was wrong, very wrong. My sister emailed me the documents that same night. I opened them expecting confusion. Instead, I found clarity. The kind of clarity that makes you wish you were still confused. The property was real. The ownership records were real. And attached to those records was a familiar name, my brother, of course. At that point, I honestly laughed, not because it was funny, because it was so predictable. For months, every mystery seemed to lead back to him. The question wasn't whether he was involved. The question was how involved. The next day, all three siblings met without our parents. That alone was unusual. Most of our conversations happened during holidays or family events. Never like this. Never with legal documents spread across a table. My sister looked exhausted. My brother looked nervous. And I was somewhere between frustrated and curious. Then my brother said something nobody expected. He didn't know about the property. At least, not entirely. Apparently, he knew his name was connected to an investment, but he believed it was a business asset, not a residential property, not something purchased using money connected to the sale of our childhood home. Honestly, I didn't know whether to believe him, but his confusion looked genuine. Then we started comparing information. And that's when another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. For years, our parents had been quietly moving money between different accounts. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic, just a series of financial decisions nobody discussed openly. Small transfers, small investments, small rescues. Individually, they seemed harmless. Together, they created a very different picture. A picture of parents desperately trying to hold everything together. Then came the revelation that changed my entire perspective. The second property wasn't purchased for my brother. It was purchased because my parents were terrified. Terrified of running out of money, terrified of getting older, terrified of depending on other people. Ironically, the very thing they feared became the thing they created. The more they tried to control the future, the less control they actually had. Then my sister discovered something buried deep in the paperwork. A letter, not legal paperwork, a personal letter written by my father, never sent, never shared. just stored among financial records. At first, we weren't sure whether we should read it, then curiosity won. The letter wasn't addressed to any of us. It was addressed to himself, almost like a journal entry, and honestly, it was the most honest thing I'd ever seen him write. For the first time, there were no excuses, no justifications, no carefully crafted explanations, just regret. Page after page of regret, regret about treating his children differently. Regret about constantly rescuing my brother. Regret about taking my independence for granted. Regret about assuming I'd always be okay simply because I'd survived difficult situations before. One sentence hit harder than everything else. I spent so much time worrying about the child who might fail that I stopped appreciating the child who kept succeeding. Room went silent because nobody knew what to say after that. For years, I'd wondered whether my parents even noticed the difference in treatment. Apparently they did, far more than I realized. Then came the final confrontation. Not dramatic, not explosive, just overdue. All of us sat down together, parents, children, no lawyers, no paperwork, no interruptions, just honesty. And honestly, it was uncomfortable. My mother cried. My father apologized. My sister admitted years of resentment. My brother admitted years of dependence. And for the first time, nobody tried to defend the past. They simply acknowledged it. That mattered more than I expected, not because it fixed everything, because it ended the arguments about what happened. The facts were finally accepted. Then came the question everyone had been avoiding. Would my parents move into my house? The answer surprised absolutely nobody. No, not because I hated them, not because I wanted revenge, because it wasn't the right solution. My house wasn't a retirement plan. And after everything we'd uncovered, everyone finally understood that, including them. Instead, my parents used proceeds from the property sale and remaining assets to purchase a much smaller home. Nothing fancy, nothing huge, just enough. For the first time in decades, they built a plan that didn't depend on one of their children rescuing them. Ironically, it was probably the most independent thing they'd done in years. As for my brother, things changed there too, not overnight, but gradually. Once the constant safety net disappeared, he started making different decisions. Better decisions, not perfect ones, just responsible ones. And honestly, that was enough. People always ask if I forgave my parents. The truth is complicated. I stopped being angry. That part was important. Anger is exhausting. But forgiveness wasn't one single moment. It happened slowly, conversation by conversation, year by year, boundary by boundary. The funny thing is, when I was 18, getting kicked out felt like the worst thing that could happen to me. At the time, I thought it proved I wasn't important, that I wasn't valued, that I was somehow less loved. Years later, I learned something different. The problem wasn't that my parents loved me less. The problem was that they convinced themselves I needed them less, and that mistake shaped our entire family. The house I eventually bought wasn't important because it was expensive. It was important because I earned it. Every room, every wall, every payment. Mine. So when my parents asked to move in, the real decision wasn't about square footage. It was about boundaries. About recognizing that helping someone doesn't mean surrendering your life to solve their problems. That lesson took my family decades to learn. But eventually, we learned it. And honestly, that's probably the closest thing this story has to a happy ending.